Cool. So, guys, if that stops working or is way behind, let me know. So, um, cool. Cool is my. I think I said this before in another sermon. There, Shay's pointing at me because before young people count, these interludes are my little connection points. So, cool is one of those words I use to make to lead into the next thing. So, um, I'm not about to say cool. Thank you, Jay. See, when you're conscious of it, then what you're thinking is like, what's the other word? But it's so natural, like, you know what, let's just stick with cool. Fantastic. So, good morning. I'm Johnny. Some of you guys might know me. And obviously, connected, come here to Foyle Vineyard. And I'm sharing this morning. Someone said I have props. Yeah, so I don't actually have a visual presentation this morning. I know it's bad. If anyone was critiquing me, they said, Johnny, your learning styles, you're not thinking of all learning styles, you know. Not everyone just is auditory in their learning. You know, you need visual and you need movement and all that stuff. So I'll try and be a bit of a visual. I was thinking about you wearing a head torch all through the sermon, but that might just get distracting. Like, Johnny, you look ridiculous. We can't really take you seriously or hear what you're saying because we're just staring at this head torch. So I won't do that, but it's there. We'll make reference to it at some point. Cool. There you go. Third one, I think. So, living the way of Jesus, and we've been looking at over the last. Now, I've been out of church. It sounds like I haven't been here. I have been here, but I've been missing the sermons quite a few weeks. So I'm not sure when Ben actually did the introduction, or if he even did the introduction 2 weeks ago. Okay, I was definitely here for Steph's, although I missed the conclusion because one of our children needed a toilet. But I got the gist of it. But we're looking at a series on the Sermon on the Mount, which is a very, very famous part of the scriptures in Matthew, from Matthew 5 through to 7 chapters. And so what we've been doing is unpacking, or starting to unpack, these collections of Jesus' probably most famous teachings, entitled the Sermon on the Mount. And asking this question, what is it like, or what is it to live in the kingdom of God? And if you were here last week, Steph, she was great. She mentioned last week and took us through a lot of the different stuff, but she talked about the Bible Project. And if you got the email, as she mentioned in the announcements, the links are actually there. So if you want the links or get the links, we've been using the Bible Project as a kind of base, and it's a really helpful way of just giving us an incredible overview of this part of Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount. And the way they do that and the visuals that they use and the knowledge that they have is quite incredible. They're now actually up to 6 videos, so there must be, maybe there's another one coming out because they're suggesting that there's going to be 10, and originally I think there was only 5, but there's 6 different videos that then break down all the different teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. So check that out, as Steph mentioned last week. But last week she was looking at language. She was looking at the different meanings of what Jesus was saying about the kingdom. Now, she didn't have time to go into all 9 sayings, but I think she maybe 3 or 4 or 5 and kind of broke them down. I think because Ben's away, the podcasts aren't up, so you probably can't get it. We'll try and get it up this week. So there you go if you want to listen back to that. But she was talking and giving us lots of different meanings and asking us and talking to us about what Jesus was saying. And looking at kingdom identity and who is it that is experiencing the good life of the kingdom, the life that Jesus talks about. And this week's entitled The Responsibility of God's People. The responsibility of God's people. And so we're going to look at what is our responsibility as God's people or as followers of Christ. And so that's what we're going to dip into this morning. Friday, I'd been in Portrush with a bunch of young people on the beach, went swimming. There was only 3 of us in the end. There were a few girls, but they only kind of dipped their toes in, and the 3 lads. It was very cold, by the way, but it was exhilarating nonetheless. But anyway, after that, I got a phone call on the bus home from Catherine, said, Johnny, what do you think about getting a takeout? Now, Catherine's a big fan of takeouts. I'm kind of not as big a fan of takeouts. But the suggestion was to go to Doherty's Cafe. Some of you might know it in Bridgend. So Dawn, she's not here today, but Dawn, thank you for the recommendation of that. So I said, yeah, why not? We'll go that. So all the young people have been dropped off, and we jumped in one car, left the other car in Gallia, and headed to Doherty's fish and chips. Well, it's not a fish and chip shop. I think it's a takeaway shop, but it does fish and chips, which I will come to. So anyway, we're standing there in the queue, or Catherine was ordering. She decided to pay. I don't know if it was on the joint account, it might have been, so it was maybe both of us paying. But anyway, she was doing the ordering and she was doing all the transactions. I was holding Ella in my hands, and Josiah had gone off as he does and started talking to a random family as he does, disturbing their dinner, which was great. He's great at that. But then he'd gone and found a table kind of around the corner, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. And eventually, Catherine continued ordering. I took Ella and we went round to sit at the table. And there was a little pile of little white granules on the table. And Josiah was asking me and he was saying, what's going on there, Dad? What's on the table? And I surveyed the table and I saw that there was, a kind of jar of vinegar and a jar of salt and a little open bowl of white granules. And I thought, well, I think it's probably sugar, because there's no granules probably being spilled. So we do a taste test. And he said, yeah, why not? So he was up for that. So we took a little bit of the sugar and I put it on my finger and I said, just put the tip of your tongue on that. So he did put the tip of his tongue on that. And I said, what's it taste like? And he said, it's sweet. And I said, okay, I think it's sugar. And so he said, well, should we do another taste test? He said, yeah, no problem. So I got the other jar, which I thought was salt. And we, dripped a little bit of salt on my finger. And I said, now get ready for this one. It's not quite as nice as sugar. It's a little bit sharper. So we put a little bit on the end of my finger. And I said, again, tip of your tongue. And, that's a little bit more sour. And I said, I think that's salt. And so that was that. And you're like, okay, random story, whatever. Johnny, thank you for telling us all about your Friday evening. The chips are great, by the way. Fish wasn't bad. But we're just kind of thinking around, and we're going to think around salt today, as you'll come to in a minute. Kath and I recently actually stopped putting salt and pepper into our food. One reason was mainly to do with the kids and kind of wanting them to get to eat stuff, and also just didn't want to pollute their bodies, with salt and all that kind of thing. But every so often we'll turn to each other and we'll kind of saying, remember, there's no salt or pepper in that. It's a bit plain. You might want to add some salt and pepper, and so we usually do add some salt and pepper, and it obviously tastes fantastic. We actually have some very special salt. This is my illustration. I'll read it out to you because it's just impressive. Now, it's called Seaweed Seasoning Smoked Whiskey with Garlic and Rosemary. So it's actually Cavan's family produced this. They go on the rocks down in Kilkeel somewhere, don't they? They don't find, well, they find the seaweed. I don't think they find smoked whiskey down there. But you never know. But anyway, they get this salt. It's actually quite incredible. It's even better than just your normal salt. But anyway, salt has this incredible thing, doesn't it, of adding flavor. And a wonderful way of adding flavor. And we'll come to that a little bit more, and we'll chat a little bit more about what that looks like. What was Jesus talking about when he talked about salt? Light. Light's quite spectacular, isn't it? I don't know whether you've ever witnessed different displays or different arrays of light. I don't know, did anyone recently see the Northern Lights? I think it was around the 10th or 11th of May, kind of displayed in Northern Ireland, especially maybe if you're in Donegal or kind of awake or camping or that kind of thing. Anyway, suddenly the next day, Kath and I were on the BBC News, really excited about these Northern Lights, and discovered they'd been the night before. We'd obviously been fast asleep in the land of Nod and completely missed it. And then we were hoping for the Saturday, I think it was a Friday night, the Saturday, that they would come again, but they didn't. The cloud was too kind of dark. But if you witnessed them and then you went onto the BBC website, there's all these incredible photographs that people had taken, just local people, of these wonderful arrays and displays of the Northern Lights. And I don't know if you've experienced that or seen light. My first actually kind of move towards Derry was in the year of 2013. I don't know if you were about, but it was the City of Culture in Derry. And to finish the City of Culture in Derry, what they did was a festival called Lumiere, which is basically a festival of lights. And it was quite spectacular. I ended up going. I went the first night, and I loved it that much, and it was that amazing. You kind of walked over the Peace Bridge and into St. Colum's Park, and it was dark, and there was all these fires lit and all these special lights all over the city and different installations everywhere, and they broadcast stuff or displayed stuff on, what's the old department store called? Yeah, Austin's, thank you. Oldest department store in the world, although it doesn't exist anymore. But well, it exists, but doesn't function. But yeah, and so it was incredible, all these different lights, and it was that good. I went back the following night, and as you might be aware, or you might not, on the top of this building it says a stitch in time. And if you're standing from miles and miles away at night, you can see it lit up. And that is actually an installation that they decided to keep from Lumiere and from that festival. But it was quite an incredible display of light. And often Catherine and I and the family, sometimes at Christmas, if we get a special free ticket or have a little bit of money left over because it's quite expensive, we'll go down to Hillsborough Castle and Gardens, and they do all these incredible Christmas lights and display of lights, and they're quite incredible. But light has a way of drawing you in. I don't know whether you've ever spotted a light from a distance and you can't quite work out where it's coming from, but you're drawn to it and you see it and you're looking at it and you're spotting, you're trying to work out. But even from such a far off distance, you can see it. You can't miss it. And you're like, where is that light coming from? Is it from a lighthouse? Is there a boat on the sea or that kind of thing? Or if you're like me, as you might know, I work with young people and we've played lots and lots of games of Spotlight, usually when we're ending up camping, which means hiding and kind of hiding with a torch, keeping your torch off until someone comes and find you. Every so often you're allowed to switch your torch on and off as a clue of where you're hiding so that someone can try and find you. But light is both dazzling and bemusing. But when we see it, we're drawn to it. And so this morning, we're going to look at salt and light. And in our passage this morning, Jesus mentions both those things, both salt and light. So if you want to read, or if you want to join with me, and if you've got a Bible or scriptures, if you want to turn to Matthew, and specifically Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to kind of 16, and we'll read it together. Can't remember what time. Does anyone know what time I started? No? It's fine. So obviously it's entitled Salt and Light, and this is what Jesus says just after the 9 sayings in the Beatitudes. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. You're the salt of the land, as the Bible Project references it. And Jesus here is calling his followers to be salt of the land, or he's naming, saying, you are salt of the earth, salt of the land. And salt, as we know, is a mineral and used as a preservative. And here Jesus is actually referencing, there's a symbol here that his followers, and so that's us that follow Christ, are called to preserve God's long-lasting covenant that was made with Israel. So obviously not so much now because we've got technology, it's advanced so far, we've got incredible things like freezers and fridges, and we don't need salt. But in ancient times, I'm sure you're already aware of this, but salt was used to preserve food. And sometimes when you go and visit these old places, you'll see these kind of little barns or little sheds way out, kind of just to the side of the kind of kitchen area, all wooded off. And they would have had piles and piles of salt in there, and all the meat would have kind of been put into the back, and it would have been covered in salt, the kind of preserve, and to allow it to last a really long time. And I'm not going to look these up or read these, but if you maybe want to if you're taking notes or whatever, want to make reference to these, because it might be worth just looking at them throughout the week. But in connection to this bit about salt, there are 3 kind of Old Testament references talking about salt and talking about salt as covenant and all of that kind. Now, this doesn't include the whole story about Lot and his wife and her turning to salt, which you can go and have a look at as well. That's really interesting, a really interesting reference. But Leviticus 2, verse 13, Numbers 18, verse 19, and 2 Chronicles 13, verse 5. And they talk a lot about salt and the covenant and all of that kind of thing. But here in Matthew, Jesus is claiming that his followers are carrying Israel's covenant to its fulfillment. And we'll come back to that. It's almost like talk of it being a launch party of these long-lasting ancient promises to renew the world. And here Jesus is almost suggesting or saying that us, his followers, have this responsibility to actually preserve this long covenant that's been before. Second thing is that Jesus talks about is you're the light of the world. Light illuminates the darkness. And here Jesus is actually referencing, you can have a look at it, a promise in Isaiah that the city or inhabitants of Jerusalem would one day reflect God's light, peace and blessing out to all the world. And again, Jesus is saying that his followers are fulfilling this promise or are to fulfill this promise as we're called to be salt and light. And so this idea, we've talked about it here in Foyle Vineyard before. Ben's mentioned it a number of times. But this idea that way, way back, God chose a people to reflect and display his glory. And to reflect and display who he is to the world. And so originally, way, way back, he chose the people of Israel through Abraham and Isaac and Moses and Abraham and all those guys. I know it's not in the right order. And for you Bible scholars will recognize that. But all those guys, and you can flick them in the right order that I haven't got them in. But basically this idea that these people would reflect and display his goodness to the world. So that people would watch and see and marvel and say, yes, let me be a part of this. Now, as we know, this didn't always work out. And even in the new covenant, it doesn't always work out, or there are things that need purified and changed. But it's the same idea today that continues, this idea that those who are following Christ and following Jesus and living in the kingdom are given this same responsibility to be salt and light. To preserve, to flavor, to shine, to illuminate, to reflect who God is, his goodness and his love. And this hasn't changed. Our responsibility has not changed. So what does that look like for us? Willard says it like this. He says, we're a people to cleanse, flavor, and preserve the times through which we live, or they live. To cleanse, flavor, and preserve the times through which we live. I don't know about you, but my relationship, I don't know what your relationship is like with sharing your faith and all of that kind of thing, and, the fancy religious word around evangelism, which can be helpful or not helpful depending on who you talk about. But my relationship's a really interesting one. I have a long kind of up and down relationship with sharing my faith and what that looks like from a young teenager to now over 40-year-old. I've had moments of great boldness, moments of hiding, moments of thinking I had to defend God for all his worth, and it all depended on me. I've had moments of his grace opening doors and conversations following me without doing very little, and where God has kind of set the ball in motion, and I've just got to kind of come along and join in. But in all of it, and whatever your relationship is, our responsibility still remains. And I know for many of us, that word responsibility kind of can sometimes grate with us, or kind of like make us a little bit uneasy, or it feels then like a burden. And I'm not using that word for any moment to create a kind of burden. But I'm kind of trying to think of that idea of what does that look like for us? And what does responsibility look like for us? And what can it look like? To actually bear witness to the continued encounter of Christ in our lives. So I can't speak for you. I can maybe speak a little bit for the church, but I can't speak for you. And so I thought maybe I'll share a little bit about what might that look like for me in my everyday, going along and that kind of thing. What is it like for Johnny to be salt and light in the moments that he does it really well and the moments that he doesn't not do it so well? And maybe as I'm sharing, you can listen and think about, and we'll come to this in a moment, but what does that look like for you? where you are and where you're placed. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit more. And what does it then look for us as a church in this city, and as a church with, because there's many churches in this city and lots of great churches, but what does it look like for us as a church amongst all the other churches in this city to be salt and light to this city and beyond? So this is what it looks like for me in the day-to-day, and trying to think around what my journey with sharing my faith and living that out. And there's lots of always internal conversations that I'm having most days, some days. But it's like this. It's when I go to the barbers and get my hair cut. And when I want to kind of just keep it to minimal conversation and just chat about my life, usually for me, I'm trying to filter everything I say, and I'm trying to okay, careful what you say here, you don't want them to misunderstand you, you don't want to misinterpret you, you want to just give them a kind of level playing field, don't be too expansive, just talk about the football, that's kind of easy, right? And so I'm going into the barber's actually saying, you know what, Johnny, what is it like for your tongue just to be a little bit looser? When you say what happened last weekend, you share about, we were off at a festival. What was the festival fun? Me, immediately, I want to filter, it was a festival, and now I want to just stop there. But what is it actually to have a bit of a looser tongue and say, it was a Christian festival. It was a festival where we took our family, and this is what happened. And so rather than me, and I can only speak for me because this is how Johnny works, rather than trying to filter everything through Johnny's kind of what will be acceptable and what will be okay, I actually let my tongue be a little looser. I go, we're at a festival, and this is what it's about. And so Tiernan, as he's cutting my hair, is like, okay, right, interesting, that sounds fantastic, And so that's what it looks like for me when I go to the barbers. Or maybe yesterday, what does it look like for us yesterday when we had some family around who probably wouldn't say necessarily they believe in Christ or following Christ. And our normal tradition around the family is to light a candle at the table and just to welcome the presence of Christ. And we do that, when people aren't there. And the temptation for me is to say, we'll just not do that because we don't want to make people feel slightly uncomfortable and I don't know what they think about Christ anyway, and that might be a little bit weird, so we'll just not do that because they're here. And I'd say again, this is what our family does. And rather than try and filter it and kind of block it off and stop it, we're just going to still light the candle, and we're going to express and explain. We light a candle as a representation of the presence of Christ to come. And then I'm thinking, maybe we shouldn't say grace, and we'll not say grace, but yet we usually say grace. And actually what we do is, no, Josiah, would you like to give thanks for the food? And he does. And so that's what it means for me. I have a funny story. My auntie, who you'd have to ask her where she is with Christ. I'll not make comment on her. But we were at a wedding and everyone was having a meal, all the family. And I can't remember how it happened, but basically I said, or I decided, can you remember this? No, that I wouldn't say grace or something, did I? Or anyway, she found out, and I think I'd maybe said grace the night before or said it within the family. And she was really cross and angry with me, like, Johnny, what, just because we're all here doesn't mean you. And she almost told me off and said, you better say grace. And I'm not sure, you'll have to ask her if she follows Christ or not, or is a believer, what she thinks. But she's certainly, in different stage. But she told me off for not kind of being, I suppose, integral and kind of continue with that. So that was really interesting. But those are little things that for me, where I'm trying to think, okay, how do on a simple level do we just continue to have lucid tongues and just be who we are and who God's called us to be? Or maybe another example, and this is a little bit more of a thing where I've got to step out of my comfort zone. That's not just a thing that happens all the time, but maybe in a drop-in situation where I am with young people and a young person says to me that he's not well, or that he has to go to the doctors, that he has been having to go to the hospital for different tests. And in that moment, I'm like, okay, I believe in a God that can break in powerfully in that situation. You know what? I'm going to take a step of boldness and actually offer to pray for him. And he says, yeah, no worries, Johnny. Now, nothing spectacular happened. I don't know if necessarily he got healed or anything was completely different. But in that moment, I felt God just kind of, just like push a little bit gently. And so I said, you know what? In that moment, we're going to act in boldness, and I'm going to pray for this young lad that God would actually demonstrate powerfully in his life and actually bring healing to that situation. So for you, what does that look like for you to be salt and light where you are, where you're placed? In your home, where you work, where you go for a cup of coffee, where you're walking through the city, when you're on a telephone call, when people come into your home. What does that look like for you? In those small moments where you're just doing your regular stuff and you're just living out what it is to follow Christ. And in those moments also where you feel God prompting you to step out in boldness and just to pray in that moment. And here's a question I ask myself as well. Do our lives make people thirsty? Do our lives make people thirsty? If I was to give you a big swat of salt and you're to put on your tongue, immediately you'd be wanting some kind of drink to quench your thirst. But salt, as well as preserving and bringing flavor, it also creates a thirst. And so as we are salt and light, illuminating and preserving and being salt, do our lives make people thirsty? I want to finish with a little story, and then I want to read just from the Message, because the way the Message puts it and Eugene Peterson puts this passage is really helpful, and you can almost turn it into a prayer for us. And we'll just give a little bit of time just for God to do what he wants to do. And then I think Jane, maybe on her own, is going to kind of lead us just in a song. This morning, I got a little bit emotional, which is never good when you're speaking next. You're like, oh dear, this is thanks God, thanks for ambushing me. Like I would like to go and look like I'm, reasonably sane when I'm speaking to people and people are looking at me, like who's this boy? He's just been crying for part of the morning. And I certainly was trying to control my emotions. But the Lord just reminded me of something this morning, and that's what kind of brought a little bit of emotion to me. And it's just, this is not, so it obviously involves me, but it's not, I'm not telling the story because of me. I want to tell the story because I want to encourage us as well as challenge us that as we actually encounter God and just live our lives as salt and light, it will and does impact people more than you can imagine and more than you realize. And sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. And hopefully we'll be able to tell a story as well without getting emotional. We had a residential recently in February over in Sheep Island View. And there's a team that comes and helps us from Edinburgh. And it's a team of students that come and help us. And the reason why I have that connection and know those guys is because of a young person that used to grow up in Downpatrick and used to be part of our programs in Downpatrick when I worked for youth initiatives. And he, towards the end of the residential, there everyone was kind of packing up and we were saying goodbye. And he now has his own family. He's engaged, involved in a church and connecting with students and leading with students in Edinburgh, and has a job as well. And he took me aside, and it was a real encouragement. Actually, he just explained to me, Johnny, thank you. And I was kind of saying to him, for what? And he was kind of saying, thank you, because I need to tell you, and he went into detail, I won't go into detail, but I need to tell you that whenever I was 14 or 15, growing up where I grew up, I didn't have a huge amount of hope, he said. And he said, Johnny, coming along to be part of the youth program and just watching you and seeing you actually breathe something into me. And it obviously changed his life forever. And I tell it, and it's not to do with me, because if you'd have known my life at that time, right? My life at that time was, if I reflect back on my life, was probably like, how do I explain it? Like, it wasn't great if you had looked on it from the outside. Like, it was a mess. Like, it was probably one of the darkest moments in my life. And when I look back on my life, it was one of the moments where I'm like, I thought everything was falling apart, and everything was falling apart. And I was kind of thinking, nothing is going right. And I was like, it was one of the darkest and worst moments of my life. And yet, in that moment, I tried to stay close to God, and I tried to continue just to reflect and be who God has called us to be, salt and light. And again, it's not about me, And the reason why I'm saying that is because in one of my worst, darkest moments of life, I continue to kind of try and stay close and try and be salt and light. And God uses those moments to impact young people that you don't think anything is happening. So that, I don't know, 10, 12, whatever years later, he's thanking me and saying, and he's not thanking me, he's thanking Christ in me that's reflected to him, right? Because it impacted his life and changed his life forever. And I'm sure you guys have stories like that as well. But the thing is that actually, as we reflect and as we are salt and light, God will use that, and God will breathe on that, and God will use that to impact people's lives. And so God was just whispering to me this morning at the back, do not stop being salt and light, and do not stop and filter everything you do, Johnny. Just continue to stay close to me and continue to experience and receive my love. And as you do that, and as that increases, that will then reflect to others. And others will see it, and others will witness it, and it will change others. And they will go, wow, I want to be a part of this. Who is this God that you serve? Who is this Jesus that you know? So, let me read the message just to finish. And then we'll let God do what God wants to do. Shall we stand? I'll tell you what we'll do is, if Jane, if you're okay with this. So, I don't know if you'd chosen a song, but I was thinking through this through worship that let me just read this over us as a promise and almost as a kind of reinvigorating and rebirth. And then Jane, maybe lead us. Jane, I don't know if you want to lead us in. I don't know what the song is, but that, behold him, isn't he fascinating? That kind of song. And I'll explain now and then. I was thinking this morning as I was, do you know what? Like, being salt and light is not about trying to work up more ability to be like, Lord, help me be more salty, help me be brighter. I know that's a good prayer to pray. But it's not about trying to work that up. And I've learned that through my journey of faith. It's not about like, help me be bolder. And although that's a very good prayer to pray as well. But actually what I've discovered is the key to being salt and light as individuals and as a people is that as we behold Christ and as we focus on Christ and as we remember how wonderful he is, how fascinating he is, and what he is doing and continues to do and has done in our lives, and we remember how much he loves us and how much he's impacted us. And Kath and I were talking about this in the car on the way there. And if we didn't have him, how difficult it is to love others, but also how actually a mess our lives would be. And even sometimes our lives are still a mess, but yet he's there. But actually in those moments of beholding him and giving him the space and reflecting on him and reminding of who he is and what he does in us. And as that grows and as that burns and as that increases stronger, it can't but help to get out. It just seeps out. You might, even when you try and hold it in, it seeps out. And I don't know if you realize in the Gospels, but Jesus actually most of the time told people not to say anything and said to them, because he didn't really want it to get massively out that he was Christ and the Messiah, and he didn't want people to misinterpret it. So he'd say to people, like, go home, don't be telling anyone. And every time he said that, they went away and like told everyone, and kind of it just spread out. And Timothy Keller tells this wonderful story about this guy who was really struggling with sharing his faith. And he kind of said to him, don't you worry about sharing it at all. And actually, I don't know what, but that just released something in him. And actually then he just couldn't help but share his faith. And so I believe that as our love and our faith and as we encounter Christ and as that grows in us, it won't help but actually just get out, And so let me read this over us. And then let us just reflect on the Lord and allow his Holy Spirit to do what only he can do. Salt and light. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness, and you will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this. as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven.
Thank you for joining us at Foyle Vineyard Church. We love walking out this adventure of being a family together on mission. If you've joined us for the first time today, we'd love to connect with you further. Head over to our website, www.foylevineyard.co.uk, and click I'm New to keep up to date with all the ways in which you can get involved with this busy family. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.